question to Ms. Marianne. Can you at least explain a bit about what do you think about the child marriage situation here in the country, Malaysia?
Thanks. Well, I think you can see the statistics. The globally you can see, but also in Malaysia. But the thing is that it's very hard to know the extent and magnitude of the problem here. And there's definitely an increase. I think between 2011 and 2015, there was 1,029 cases registered in the courts. But the 5 years before that, there was only 849. That's amongst the Muslim community. But it would be wrong to think that it's just something that affects one community here more than another. It's cross ethnicities and religions, and most of the cases you can see here actually happen in Southeast Asia. So there is a perception that it affects the Islamic community more, but it's not the case at all.
I think it's not really. It's not just on one side, but I think by reports we can actually see that one more. But Ms. Rosanna, do you have anything to add on that?
You can just call me Rosanna. Okay, I think what is important to understand is what do the laws say about marriage, what about the age of marriage, what is the minimum age of marriage. I'm not sure whether all of you know this, but in Malaysia particularly, we actually have two sets of laws. So we have a set of law called the Legal Reform Marriage and Divorce Act that governs marriage and divorce for non-Muslims. And then for Muslims, we have the Islamic family law under each state. So we actually have 14 different Islamic family laws because each state has one. So under the Islamic family law, the minimum age of marriage for boys is 18, and the minimum age for marriage for girls is 16. And there is also a provision that if there are either the boy or the girl younger than that, who if the application can be done to the Sharia courts for them to be married younger than those ages 18 and 16. And this application, there's a lot of questions that has been raised in terms of how do they allow, what are the guidelines in terms of allowing, marriages to happen, below the ages of 18 and 16. And at the moment, there really isn't any specific guidelines. And often what happens in both cases where, it's for Muslims and as well as non-Muslims, it's a situation where, perhaps parents feel like, the children have done something that, they feel that, it brings shame to the family, and therefore this is a way out in terms of, facing society. So definitely there is a stigma in relation to sex out of marriage. And I think there's still a lot of pressure in terms of how do we cover this shame, and therefore the situation is quite disturbing in that sense, because we're not actually providing more options. What are the options? This is a pressure that they feel that they have to get married.
Okay, I would like to explain here that it's a learning process for me as well. So there's no question that's going to be considered a stupid question. Okay. Now the thing is that I also understand that if it's with the law or without the law, kids who have no education or no option, who do not know anything, would actually find a way to get this thing happen. So basically, can you actually imagine if the law said no, not at all, and what's going to happen? What if they get pregnant? What if documentation problem, going to school problem, all that, right? So at one point in my life, reading up on this, I kind of have this statement in my head saying there is a need for child marriage, and that is a bit troublesome. I've never written out about it because I'm not well versed in it. But to educate myself in this factor, I wanted to ask Marianne, what are the consequences for the girls, especially for the girls or the boys, if they get married below the age of 18? Can you share that bit?
Well, I think our insider just before Miriam related the case of a 13-year-old. I mean, there are many consequences. One of the obvious ones, the consequences on her health, on her education, then on her capacity to become a sort of productive member of society, because she's doesn't have the same skills or education as others who might compete with her. And then, think of yourselves. I mean, how many people are 18 here? Any? Few? 18 under? I imagine if you were a parent, the responsibility of that, or of a child, having a child, being in marriage, it affects your social relations because your mates are going out with others and you have to stay and look after the child. But also, medically, it's proven that in the second, globally, let's say, the second biggest cause of death amongst 15 to 19-year-olds girls is pregnancy and childbirth. And a girl who has a child between, say, the age of 13 and 15 is 6 times more likely to have complications in childbirth than a woman who's 20 and above. So obviously on the physical side, your body's not ready for it. Even if physically, you can conceive well, in other ways you're not, and mentally also you're not. You're not ready to take on the responsibilities of a family. And then often these marriages, they don't last. There's high rates of domestic violence in these child marriages, and then it wasn't free and consensual very often. At that age you're not ready to sort of know all the responsibilities and to openly accept to go into marriage. There are many consequences, and it's just wrong in practice and principle. Yeah.
Although when I keep hearing that, and then this is the hard part of being me, because I'll just start criticizing everything. But hearing all that, I think that in this country we also have issues in accepting puppy love, teens falling in love, having crushes and all that. And I wanted to ask Rosanna, that do you think it's true that we do not talk enough about relationship and boundaries? Will that be one of the factors that actually leads to child marriage, probably?
Definitely. I mean, what Mariam had earlier, presented to all of us, there is a reluctance to talk about sex. And I think, but what goes beyond that is also this whole notion about, do we actually, put any respect to the child, especially a girl child? And there are always, very high expectations, and in terms of, you would tend to put a woman or a girl, on a higher pedestal of morality. So somebody, you're expecting a little girl, and you find little girls, look, they're all, on their videos and, watching YouTube, and they're all like dancing and pretending to be like some hot superstar, and they're completely unaware about their sexuality, and yet, other people may be looking at them in a way where, this person, this young child is an object. And they're not looking at this person as a human being. So, I've deviated from your question. What's your question?
It's true.
Right. So, yes. So there's a lot of realization that we need to have, really as parents. I mean, sometimes I think we all go through the motions in life. We get married. After that, naturally, of course, we want to have children, right? But sometimes we really don't think about. We think that what is this child doing and how much this child is bringing into our life. But what about the other way around? I mean, it's like, what is our responsibility in terms of equipping this child to have a sense of awareness of herself and the people around her, and the voice that he or she carries in terms of her boundaries, what you can do, what somebody can do to you, what somebody can't do to you. And this is often really not talked about. So of course then you expect this person, this little child, to be able to say no when she doesn't know. I mean, she just thinks that you think that somebody extending out something, she's going to think that you're only being friendly and nice to me because of that issue of trust. So there's a lot that needs to be done.
Thank you. Hold on, Zigri, you have a question?
Yes, I do actually. First of all, thank you for coming here, and I think everybody's anticipated for these amazing heroes, you can say, voices of children who have no voice, of rights that they don't have, or they don't not aware of. So I have a very I have just one question. Again, please feel free to come up here. This is the whole reason why we have this fishbowl. Anyone can come up here, so don't hesitate to come and be part of this conversation, because this is what the fishbowl is all about. So my question is just very the tangible one. It's more about everyone here is very much educated about the whole situation, especially our students. They are aware of the whole, this child predator going on, this incest, stealing these children. They know about it, and they feel very, they want to do something. Apart from just signing for a petition, right? What other channels can they do right now that they can get involved in? Because I was just talking to a lot of people here. They're like, yeah, the petition's great. And is there any other avenue that they can get involved? Maybe do something different, something to spur something, because they're hungry. It's kids, it's children. So this is my question. So totally up to you guys.
Okay, I'll pass to Marianne first.
Yeah, okay. But there's no petition necessarily for child marriage, not one going on at the moment like Predators in My Phone, one against sexual grooming. But one, I think, is awareness. It's encouraging, it's raising, being the voice for children, because those young girls who are getting married or forced into marriage, if they are to hide shame, as you were saying, Rosanna, then parents need to know there are other avenues. This is not right. This is not a solution, because it's dangerous. As I've said, some of the causes of the effects on the child, whether it's a girl or a boy. It could be a boy. There are boys. Yes, it affects girls more, but boys also, as you can see, also get married, and they're not ready for it. And then there is a cost. We did. So I'm not answering your question directly, but in Nepal. They did it. What's the cost of child marriage on the economy? And it costs 3 to 4% of GDP and lost opportunity of having these young people out of the workforce, looking after children, and also not able to care for their children, right? So it's raising awareness through forums like this, but through your Facebook or channels and whatever, and creating a social movement for change, and change then that will allow change in the law. But once that you can have the laws there, but if social norms and perceptions aren't changed either, then that law may not be implemented, as you were saying. Because we've talked a lot about the cause of it being maybe sex or premarital sex or whatever, but Syed did have a point. Some of it is due to lack of opportunity. Girls who live in poverty amongst the migrant population, refugee population, in the indigenous populations, girls who drop out of school after primary school, and maybe boys also.
Yeah.
They're more prone to get married early.
Yes.
So, there's no quick fix. One is just raising awareness that this is wrong. There are other avenues. Marriage is not an answer, because it leads to intergenerational poverty, health complications, everything else that I've mentioned, and it'll take time. It may be take a generation, but a first step would be, and it's encouraging to see a change in perceptions in Malaysia. Even in the 11 months that I've been here now, more and more people speaking out to say, irrespective of religion, the minimum age should be 18. And I would say even at 18, it's too young, because I don't know what the 18-year-olds feel in this room, but I don't think you're ready to get married and to take on that responsibility of a family. But at least at 18, it sets a minimum which is acceptable by international standards.
Okay, was that?
What can we do?
Yeah. Do something right now.
Now, somehow I find that in Malaysia, when we talk about the issue of child abuse, everybody gets riled up. Everybody reacts to it in a way where they really feel passionate for it, because kesian, the student have been done and all of that. What we need to do, is to have a little bit more discussion in terms of looking at child marriage as is a form of child abuse, and then we will be able, so the most important thing is to look at, I think what we need to do is to take this in a way where it's a rights-based approach. Everyone has human rights. The minute we are born, we have rights. It is just there, all right? And I think we need to talk about this a little bit more in terms of, okay, when we talk about rights, whose rights are being violated? Whose rights are we protecting? And this goes as well in terms of, because Tini here has highlighted to me, thank you very much, this whole issue of there's a jarring conflict of interest, okay, between statutory rape, yes, statutory rape, it's a crime, and child marriage. How do you make, at which point do you make the distinction? Nobody is talking about that. So what is important, I think, is, we really need to have a change in terms of this whole discussion about rights, what it's all about. I don't think rights are actually talked about enough.
Yes.
We think it's out there, and most of us see it's in a very negative way. I think, I'm not saying that, you must believe in human rights, though I do think actually you should all believe in human rights. But let's talk about it a bit more. Let's educate ourselves in order for us to be able to talk about it and educate, the people around us.
If I can share an opinion, first of all, I believe that public pressure is very powerful, and you have to demand conversations and dialogue to be open. You have to demand data. You have to demand demographics. You have to actually understand why do these children opt to say yes to marriage? Why during court sessions they would say yes, I want to get married. We have to listen to these reasons because they have rights as well. But do they know all their options? So that is very, very much important. That's number one. And I know it sounded very hard to do. The other question is, for somebody who is actually pro to child marriage, you will see them around nowadays. I normally ask the question, so you wouldn't mind your daughter or your sister to get married at the age of 13? I normally ask back that question. No, it's not for me. I just don't want. They will answer that. No, it's not for me. I just don't want the options to be closed. Because for certain people, they do need it. So if I ask again, would a predator say yes to it? Of course they would say yes to it. So, but the whole thing is, the dialogue has to be there. This is why sometimes, I think the three of us, or people actually do this, we might be desensitized because there are simple questions that we might forget because we've been looking into these cases, we've been looking into the numbers, we're making into global and charts and all that we sometimes want to know that where did we go wrong? How come we cannot make that person understand the issue? Having said that, my next question, thank you, Sophie. My next question is, well, there are a lot of cases in this country that older generations, they do get married young. Okay? So basically, and when people say that, oh look, my grandmother got married at the age of 30. Come on, humor me for a bit in this Friday night. So how do you actually tackle that? Do you mind sharing?
Well, first of all, we're not in your grandmother's era. We're in the 21st century. And, there are international norms which Malaysia has signed up to. And how do you tackle it? I mean, it is basically, a question of rights and options. And going back to what can be done, you can engage with religious leaders, whatever the denomination. They should also advocate for age of 18 and consent as being a basis for marriage. It's not an option to hide sexual crime, where perpetrators then they get let off because because they got married, as you were sort of implying. But it's wrong by the law. The Convention on the Rights of the Child has been ratified by Malaysia. That sets an age of the child at 18. It talks also about the best interests of the child. Obviously, it's not in the best interest. The Committee on the Rights of the Child often speaks out against child marriage, especially in terms of it being seen even by the Sustainable Development Goals, for which there's a specific target to which Malaysia also adheres. That it's considered a harmful practice against children. So so there's all this, that this legal framework, this awareness, it maybe wasn't available in your grandmother's time or others' grandmother's time, and it was wrong then, and it's wrong now, and we're more aware and we're more advanced. And if this nation wants to be an advanced nation, as it claims to be, it needs to stop these practices. And people like you, by lobbying MPs, by raising awareness in your communities, in schools, wherever, when you see children dropping out of school, this is an action, a call to movement to bring social change along. And it may take a generation. And for sure, I'm sure none of your children will marry at 13, 14, 15, or maybe even 18. But it needs more people like us to raise that awareness.
Yay.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
I actually don't have a question. I just want to add something to it. I'm Palestinian, so I wanted to talk a bit quickly about how it is in our, I wouldn't say Palestine generally, I'm saying the Arab world. Our problem, and I won't generalize, it's certain areas. Our problem is that it's so engrossed in our culture that it's normal to get married at such a young age. Parents raise you to such a way that if you're not married at a certain age, it's a disgrace, it's a shame. So kids grow up to be waiting for that moment to find someone to get married to. And the problem is, so often it happens that these kids, 13, 14, will end up getting married to 20s, 30s, and the parents are so happy. We had a very well-known show, and it was in Lebanon, and they had a whole talk. The guy interviewed all these kids that married these old people, and they brought their families because they want to know, is it the families were okay with it, or did the child just run away? And a lot of cases, the child ran away to get what they wanted, and in the end, the parents gave up. And these kids are all married to older people, much older people. Some families were like, we are so happy, our daughter found a home. And the disgusting part about it is when they interview the guy who married this child, he says, I am like her father, I'm marrying her to raise her up. So I like to take her when she's young, and I'll put all the new ideas in her head. And that's how it is, and it's shocking to see that this is normal there. I won't generalize though, but it still happens. And our problem is, how can we change it in a culture? It's so hard to change such a big thing in a culture. That's what's odd.
I think Marianne touched base about changes for that. But thank you so much for that insight. I mean, it's something that is still mind-boggling. But I have another question. Rosanna, is there any study to see the effect after they get married? Is there anybody looking after the numbers, like say in 5 years, 7 years, what happens to these children so far that you know of? That's number one. And number two, because I think the answer is going to be short, the number two is, Marianne touched a bit about religion. And I want to know here, is there any such dialogue happening, Sisters in Islam and any religious authority when it comes to that?
I'll answer the second question first. Okay. So at the moment, what Sisters in Islam is doing is, we're going out there to open the discussion. We've been talking to Islamic political parties. We are also talking to Islamic NGOs, and trying to see, what are the common grounds that we have, where can we find commonality in terms of these issues, and how can we at least discuss it and move it forward. And moving up from there, we organized a public forum on the issue of child marriage, and we invited the public. It was a good turnout, and we also invited the religious authorities. Unfortunately, it would have been great if they had turned up and then they could hear from our panel of speakers and engage with the audiences. But unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know why they don't turn up. It was on a weekend, but you could just spend half a day, and just see what the public thinks about this issue, because people are concerned. People want to do something about it, just like some of you have expressed up here. Now, in terms of data, so actually running up to that public forum, what we wanted to do was, it's hard to get data, and I think partly it's also because of this whole issue of shame. How do we talk about it? How do we actually, for the girl child, let's say she gets married, or she was married off, and she's the one who's left behind in her community, in her society, because she's seen her friends, going beyond, getting educated, coming back, with different kinds of, benefits and different kinds of lifestyles and opportunities, and she feels left behind. And it's not something that's easy to talk about, and we have even tried to reach out. We thought, okay, why don't you come and share with us your experience? And I think there's just so much stigma and shame, and we're not making it easier, I guess. By saying that child marriage is something that we should. I think that there needs to be an opening up of spaces for women and girl child to be able to come forward to say, I'm in this predicament, what do I do? But what we do know is that, definitely when you are, putting a child in, through marriage at a very early age, you're putting her in a position of vulnerability when she's already so defenseless.
Okay. But we do know in this country, the media, whenever there's a case of child marriage, they've been glorified as well. It's on the front page, the day of the wedding, both are smiling. I mean, that's the fact. That's how we know there is child marriage, because it's there in the paper. So if we ask them, we talk about this to them, they might think differently, or they're not educated enough to know their options. Okay? That is something to think about as well, because it's there. And if you Google, you can find all these married couples at their age. Marianne, I want to, sorry Nala, you want to ask something first? No, you're already there, come on.
Okay, so my question is, or what I want to say is, with the state of the wars happening, the stateliness of children and people, so what some parents would think that if I give my daughter to someone, even at a young age, at least that I know that she has a home, I know that she's safe. So how do you prevent that? Even though she's getting married at a young age, at 14 or 13, the parents think that they're protecting their child, but at the same time they're not really.
In cases of war?
Yes.
It's hard to say if that's it. I mean, we don't know if that's happening, right? Really, maybe it is. The custody, but there is, it's a question of what other services, what other options are available, and as long as there aren't services such as, hopefully you would try and keep the whole family together, because that's also, in case of war and child protection, the best place for the child is with the family. So it's a question of having those services. I don't really have the answer, but I would imagine that if a family has to give their child into custody for somebody else, thinking that they would be safer, is because the services in that country to protect that family and the child aren't available. And it's kind of equated to what I don't know where she is, but our friend from Palestine was saying, how can you change things in a culture when it's a belief? That's also driven by belief. I can't keep my, any abandonment of a child, I'm too poor to nourish it. Look on the news, I don't know if you saw Al Jazeera this morning, people in Venezuela who are giving their children away because they can't feed them. Or any rights case, it's the same thing. What social protection is there in case of war or whatever? And for the Palestinian case, or it's not just in Palestine, in any country where that is seen to be a norm, right? Let me equate it to, say, female genital mutilation. right, which happens. How do you change that? If it's a social norm and you're laughed at if you're not cut, whatever, by your peers, there's peer pressure as well, you know, and if it's a social norm, then also your friends will say, oh, you know, you're 20-something and you're not married yet, what's wrong with you? And you become ridiculed. But it does take education. In countries where you have had, sort of awareness raising, and it's, first of all, the first stance is the government has to say, okay, this is wrong. And education happens at schools. It will take a generation. But then you also have to address what is driving it culturally. Why is this thought to be acceptable? Yeah. And there's young and there's young. You know, we're talking about child marriage. Anyone under 18, this is what we're talking about, early marriage. So, you know, when it then becomes 18 and over time, there's more opportunities as countries get richer as well. It's often linked to poverty and lack of opportunities, where girls are thought to, you know, you will go and live with your with a man's family and he'll take care of you, and that's a similar thing. But in case of war, it's really about other services and what the humanitarian community can do to ensure that families stay together, that they get the aid they need, and that having to give your child away to somebody else to look after is not made to be an option. But that's often hard in times of war. And even in the Second World War, you saw children being sent away from their families.
I also just want to ask if for children who have been exposed to like predators or who have been raped, or are there any programs to help them recover from that experience?
Here in Malaysia? There are some, yes. There are services available, probably not enough services available, and it's also, you know, whether those young people go to those services as well, and where they are, if they're close to the home. So I'd say that there's a need to do more. There's also a need to help young women who have been raped or who fall pregnant to get back into the school system, because oftentimes, you know, they're stigmatized. It's very hard for them to go back into the school. I know in Sarawak, for example, there is an interministerial committee that is specifically looking at those cases. You know, and so if a girl has dropped out of school, they'll work with the Ministry of Education. She might not go back to the same school, but to another one. If it's she's pregnant because of a case of rape, they'll give her legal counsel, and that's a really good initiative. Yeah. But you know, helping those young girls get back into school, continue with their lives, so that, you know, this one incident, whether it's a mistake, like, you know, you didn't know you got pregnant through sex, or because you just didn't have sexual education, or whatever it is, that shouldn't be life-defining and stop you in your tracks. You should be able to carry on with your life and have a second chance. And yes, get the counselling that you need to get back on track. And that also requires open dialogue with your parents. So oftentimes, young people that we've talked to are too afraid to go to their parents, or their parents just, you know, there isn't that dialogue available.
In Sabah, may I add, and in Sarawak as well, the Ministry of Health, actually, they do have one-stop teen pregnancy centers. Not in every place, but they do have that, and that's actually very much positive. I really applaud that effort. Rosanna, I have one last question. Okay, prevention side, we all are trying to do that, but what about the one who is currently married? Is there any support services for them at the moment?
I would think that, you know, the support that they need, you know, would probably be in relation to their situation within the marriage. So for sisters in Islam, you know, we do have a telephone counselling line that's open and available. And but so far, interestingly enough, you know, we have not had any calls yet on this. So even that was something that I realized running up to the child marriage forum, because I was trying to find out, okay, how many calls do we receive about, you know, child marriage, or, you know, I'm about to be married and, you know, off or whatever. And I realized that, you know, that we need to actually make like a campaign, you know, have a campaign to say, are you going to be married off? Call us and we'll talk to you. Know what your rights are as a girl. Yeah.
I think that's good, and that's one thing that all of you can do actually. Just open up the Facebook page or website to find out how to actually use these hotline numbers and start doing it in your own platform. With that, I'm very sorry that we have to end this. Marianne, Rosanna, Ms. Wu, thank you so much.